Welcome to Body Matters podcast, where we bring to you raw and inspiring content on all things to do with body positivity and eating disorder recovery. Welcome back to the Understanding Body Matters podcast. On today's episode, we have actually brought in Body Matters psychotherapist, Mihaela, and we'll be touching on all things to do with systemic family constellations. Now, for those who might not know what this is, we will be touching on this in today's episode, as well as who might benefit from this modality. So we hope that you enjoy and have a quick listen. So hi, Mihaela. Welcome to the Understanding Body Matters podcast. For those who don't know, Mihaela is our psychotherapist that we have at Body Matters. To start off with, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background information on what you do and where you're from?
All right, thank you. So, hello, my name is Mihaela Homjak, and I am a new therapist at Body Matters as of this January. I also work as a counselor at the Butterfly Foundation for Eating Disorders, and I facilitate support groups and programs there. So what's also interesting about me is that I do have a lived experience of an eating disorder myself. So I have been recovered for many years now, but that experience actually allows me to really understand this field and work collaboratively with my clients. And my background is psychology. I use a holistic, integrative approach in my work, combining various modalities, but it's mostly based on internal family systems with unconditional acceptance of all parts, and also on Carolyn Costin's holistic approach to eating disorders. I guess I have also worked with addictions and other mental health issues as well. But my passion and interest, it's not just dealing with the symptoms and behaviors, but actually delving deeper, discovering the underlying issues and actually truly healing what's underneath.
Now, with each episode, we usually ask our guests if they have a challenge that they've faced recently and how they did overcome that. So if you had a challenge that you've faced recently that you'd like to share, would you be happy to go into that?
Yes, for sure. I think I have been dealing with quite a few challenges, and I believe a lot of people have been dealing with a few challenges, especially during this COVID time. It has been a time, I guess, of increased uncertainty, and it has stripped us all of our coping mechanisms and distractions. So I'm no exception to that. And I think being originally from Croatia, I have been connecting with that disconnection from my family and friends from there, and really feeling that loneliness and fear around it. So how I overcome that, I have been committed to really staying with my emotions, and I did everything that I would usually suggest to my clients. So I connected with self-compassion, gentleness, and really holding all my parts, all the protective parts, all my wounded parts. I danced and cried my heart out. I sat out with those emotions that are quite uncomfortable. And I think I used nature a lot as well to ground and to bring myself back to my center. So I believe that I can only guide my clients into places that I myself have been brave enough to go to. So this was one of my recent challenges.
Definitely. I think when I go through a challenge, being in nature helps me the most, especially even if that's just a walk outside or just being out in the open air. I definitely think that helps me go through those times as well, but I can only imagine what it's like being away from family where you can't see them, especially during times where we don't even know when we can go overseas in Australia now, so it is hard. So I definitely feel for you in that way.
Thank you.
To start off with, I thought we'd start off with what systemic family constellations are.
Yes, so my passion and curiosity of exploring the inner worlds has led me to become a systemic family constellations facilitator. So this is a topic that I really wanted to share about. It's really dear to my heart. And it is quite an experiential therapeutic method. So a bit hard to describe in words, but I will do my best to try. It's been developed by Bert Hellinger, and he was a German psychotherapist. And it draws from a number of modalities, and I'll just name a few. Those have been Gestalt therapy, psychoanalysis, Virginia Satir's family sculpting, hypnotherapy, systemic family therapy, and Zulu beliefs. So Hellinger has been a priest for 25 years, and also he was a missionary in Africa. So he worked with the Zulu tribe, and that's where he learned a lot. So the nearest translation of the original German word Aufstellung was constellation, which means placement or assembly. And so that actually explains that systemic family constellations work is used with systems, so individuals, families, organizations, and also larger collectives like cities or countries. So what is unique to systemic family constellations is that it uses the so-called knowing field to bring insights into issues and patterns that have roots in family or even transgenerational entanglements. And some of those issues can be presenting in one's current life. Like it could be patterns in romantic relationships, friendships, family relations, workplace issues, chronic illnesses, addictions, also mental health issues like eating disorders. And this is why I actually wanted to talk about it in this context as well.
What does a constellation look like?
Yes, so I will do my best to describe it. As I said, it's a bit experiential, so I would recommend if someone is interested to definitely best come and experience it. So the knowing field that I've mentioned is a term given to that energetic field that forms in a constellation process. So Bert actually found that when he set up people in a spatial arrangement from each other in looking at an issue for a client, that the representatives actually started noticing sensations, emotions, and desire for movement in their bodies. And that gave really valuable information to the people involved and also the therapist who uses that to facilitate the process to the potential resolution or disentanglement. And so constellations are usually done in groups, but they can also be done one-on-one, where objects are representing people or concepts. And COVID time has actually taught us that Zoom constellations work amazingly as well. And I personally love and often facilitate so-called blind constellations. And those are quite interesting because representatives step into positions not knowing much or anything at all about the issue, or also they don't know who they're representing, and still they start feeling those sensations and emotions. But just it helps to put aside the mind and expectations and just tune into the process. And what it usually looks like. So the facilitator talks to the person who has an issue and tries to find out more about the issue, but also they're curious about their family system and ancestral lines. So some of the important information together would be any potential causes of entanglements like family secrets, miscarriages, abortions, abuse, addictions. And the basic principle is everyone and everything belongs. So oftentimes if a family member was in some way excluded, that can create an entanglement that can continue showing up in the system throughout the generations and then be causing all of those issues we mentioned. So the goal is to identify that exclusion or entanglement and then facilitate the resolution so the love can actually start flowing again. And I guess it's important to also mention that constellation is not an ongoing therapeutic method. And for some, it may be enough to set up a constellation only once. And some may need to have a few. And each constellation, I guess, can show different layers of an issue. So I guess it's best also to leave space and time for it to unfold, because the effects can actually unfold for weeks and months and sometimes even years. It's quite a special experience.
Yeah, definitely. Now for those, because I know I'm a bit familiar with it, but I'm sure there are others that do want to dive in and learn a bit more. Who could benefit from that modality?
Sometimes people have been experiencing eating disorders for a long time, and they've had so many attempts at recovery that for them it can be really hard to connect with hope. Mm-hmm. And I guess in that case, it may be worthwhile exploring whether some of the underlying issues may be rooted in entanglements in their family or ancestral system. And that can, I guess, help to reconnect with that hope again. But generally, constellations would be recommended if someone is experiencing any issues that they haven't been able to shift and heal, even though they have tried in many conventional ways. And those issues often follow a pattern that is repeating, like being drawn to similar dynamics in relationships, very similar situations, for example, in the workplace, similar types of people, in toxic relationships. And somehow they're feeling they always end up in the same cycle. So that can be a good sign that it may be something transgenerational there. Also, if one senses that some of the issues they're experiencing may not even be theirs, so they may have inherited them from their parents, grandparents, or even other ancestors they've never met, that could be a good sign as well. Or if a person knows that there have been traumas and painful events in their ancestral line that need to be acknowledged, included, and honored. And just some of examples would be addictions, abuse, illnesses, early deaths, miscarriages, even adoptions or divorces. So I guess it would be worth trying out this method if one feels stuck, confused, or unable to move forward.
For those that do have an eating disorder, how do you think that they would benefit from this kind of approach as well?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, systemic family constellations is not a therapeutic method like an ongoing one, but it would definitely be worthwhile setting up the constellation and just looking at the system. So seeing, for example, setting up an eating disorder as a representation of it, as a concept, then it can oftentimes unfold and show the connection with either one of the parents or grandparents, or where actually the entanglement is in the system, if that's what has been connected with it and causing it. So I would then recommend, and especially if someone has tried many other ways and methods, to give it a go and come into the field and just open up towards those insights, because it may bring a lot of, just peace and seeing where it comes from. It may shift. And oftentimes what happens in constellations, things that are dealt with in the field can have effects on the whole system outside of it. So even if it is connected with other people or other entanglements and blockages, it can actually shift just from the person being there. And it can also, help to bring insight into what it's connected with. So it would guide them in a direction in their treatment, perhaps. That's how I see it. Quite a magical experience.
It is, yeah.
I still remember my first one 10 years ago, and that's something you never forget, just being in the field and how it affected. It doesn't matter whether you're a client or a representative or a facilitator, it's just a very special experience. So
yeah, definitely. Well, they're all the questions that I have today. So thank you for joining on your first episode on the podcast. I definitely learn a lot, so I have no doubt that many others listening will. But we hope to have you on another episode later in the future. But thank you for coming on for today's episode.
Oh, thank you so much, Maddie. It was my pleasure.